Hi. I'm going to be reading to you from Island of the Blue Dolphins from my clay crusted Kindle. I, I would show you the book. There's no pictures. I would show you the book, but it's just my Kindle that has clay stuck all over it. Chapter 11. I was awakened by the waves dragging at my feet. Night had come, but being too tired to leave the sandspit, I crawled to a higher place where I would be safe from the tide and again went to sleep. In the morning, I found the canoe a short distance away. I took the baskets, my spear, and the bow and arrows, and turned the canoe over so that the tides would not take it out to sea. I then climbed to the headland where I had lived before. I felt as if I had been gone a long time as I stood there looking down from the high rock. I was happy to be home. Everything that I saw, the otter playing in the kelp, the rings of foam around the rocks that guarded the harbor, the gulls flying, the tides moving past the sandspit, filled me with happiness. I was surprised that I felt this way, for it was only a short time ago that I had stood on this same rock and felt that I could not bear to live here another day. I looked out at the blue water stretching away, and all the fear I had felt during the time of the voyage came back to me. On this morning I first sighted the island. It had seemed like a great fish sunning itself. I thought that some day I would make the canoe over and go out once more to look for the country that lay beyond the ocean. Now I knew that I would never go again. The island of the Blue Dolphins was my home. I had no other. It would be my home until the white men returned in their ship. But even if they came soon, before next summer, I could not live without a roof or a place to store my food. I would have to build a house, but where? That night I slept on the rock, and the next day I began the search. The morning was clear, but to the north banks of clouds hung low. Before long they would move in across the island, and behind them many other storms were waiting. I had no time to waste. I needed a place that was sheltered from the wind, not too far from Coral Cove and close to a good spring. There were two such places on the island, one on the headland and the other less than a league to the west. The headland seemed to be the more favorable of the two, but since I had not been to the other for a long time, I decided to go there and make certain. So, along with all native Californians and basically all native peoples, the number one thing before someone was going to build a house or build a village, construct a village, would be to look for a water source or a water supply. Her island only has two springs on it. There's no river, there's no ponds, there's just two springs, places where water comes up out of the ground. And so she doesn't want to live really far away from the water supply because that means she's going to have to carry water across the island, and that's a big pain. Every time she wants to take a bath or wash herself, she's going to have to drag water. Oh, every time she wants to drink, she's going to have to drag fresh water. So she's thinking there's two springs on the island. I'm going to live either near one spring or the other spring so that it's convenient for me to get water. The first thing I found, which I had forgotten, was that this place was near the wild dog's lair. As soon as I drew near to it, the leader came to the opening of the cave. Well, duh, the dogs also have to get water too, so they're using one of the springs. You don't want to share the spring with the wild dogs. Sorry, Percy and Winston. They got all offended. As soon as I drew near to it, the leader came to the opening of the cave and watched me with his yellow eyes. If I built a hut here, I would first have to kill him and his pack. I planned to do this anyway, but it would take much time. The spring was better than the one near the headland, being less brackish and having a steadier flow of water. Besides, it was much easier to reach, since it came from the side of a hill and not from a ravine, as the other one did. It was also close to the cliff and a ridge of rocks which would shelter my house. The rocks were not so high as those on the headland, and therefore would give me less protection from the wind. Yet they were high enough, and from them I could see the north coast and Coral Cove. The thing that made me decide on the place to build my house was the sea elephants. The cliffs here fell away easily to a wide shelf that was partly covered when the tide came in. It was a good place for sea elephants because they could crawl halfway up the cliff if the day were stormy. On fair days they would fish among the pools or lie on the rocks. The bull is very large and often weighs as much as 30 men. The cows are much smaller, but they make more noise than the bulls, screaming and barking through the whole day and sometimes at night. The babies are noisy too. On this morning the tide was low and most of the animals were far out. Just hundreds of specks against the waves, yet the noise they made was deafening. So you don't want to live near where sea elephants live because they are so noisy. They just lay on the beach making noise. And so she doesn't want to live there because she's never going to be able to get any sleep. It's going to be a giant sea elephant party all the time. I stayed there the rest of the day looking around, and that night, at dawn when the clamor started again, I left and went back to the headland. There was another place to the south where I could have built my house, near the destroyed village of Galastat, but I did not want to go there because it would remind me of the people who were gone. Also the wind blew strong in this place, blowing against the dunes which cover the middle part of the island, so that most of the time sand is moving everywhere. Rain fell that night and lasted for 2 days. I made a shelter of brush at the foot of the rock, which kept off some of the water, and I ate food that I had stored in the basket. I could not build a fire because of the rain, and I was very cold. On the 3rd day the rain ceased, and I went out to look for things which I would need in building the house. I likewise needed poles for a fence. I would soon kill the wild dogs, but there were many small red foxes on the island. They were so numerous that I could never hope to get rid of them, either by traps or with arrows. They were clever thieves, and nothing I stored would be safe until I had built a fence. The morning was fresh from the rain. The smell of the tide pools was strong. Sweet odors came from the wild grasses in the ravines and from the sand plants on the dunes. I sang as I went down the trail to the beach and along the beach to the sand spit. I felt that the day was an omen of good fortune. It was a good day to begin my new home. So she's completely changed from hating the island to realizing that the island is her home, right? And even if you don't like your home and you don't like where you're living, it's better to just fall in love with your home and like it because it makes life more pleasant. So she's kind of made the decision that even though she's alone and she's lonely, she's going to look at her island with a new eye, and she's going to fall in love with where she lives. And you're going to see that that happens really quickly. She starts to realize how much she loves living there and how much she loves the island. And she's also going to realize that she's not alone on the island. Even though she thinks she's alone, there's a lot of other animals on the island, right? And she's going to sort of form some animal friendships that are going to be really interesting and an interesting part of the story. All right, thanks for joining me. That was chapter 11. We will read chapter 12 next.